Hello and welcome back. Today we're starting our series on Native American history with our discussion on the Red Power movement. And we'll be focusing on the question, how has being Native American in America affected people's political opportunities? So I just want to start off with this quick do now. What does it mean to own something? How does someone gain ownership of land? Does everyone have a right to own land, a home, or possessions? Does the Constitution protect that right? So just pause this video for a second and think about those questions. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. What does it mean to own something? I would say that to own something, it means having sole ownership of something and having a measurable right to that. So say I own my phone. I own it because I've paid for it, and I know I own it because I have a receipt. When I open my phone, it has all my information on it. Like, you can't dispute that I own this phone. So, how does someone gain ownership of land? Traditionally, in America, within our system, it's meant buying or selling land. So, someone else owns a piece of land, they have a deed to that land. We drop a contract, and I pay them a certain amount for the land. And now the deed is in my name. Does everyone have a right to own land, a home, or possessions? I would argue yes. And relating back to this, does the Constitution protect that right? I would argue yes, because the Constitution says we do. So everyone knows about the famous preamble of the Constitution, and they learn about it at some point in history. You know, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So the Constitution protects the ability to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So historically, the Constitution was based off of John Locke's natural rights, and those rights are life, liberty, and property. So the spirit of that is preserved within the Constitution, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in order to have life, liberty, and pursue happiness, one has to have a home. So I would argue that everyone has the right to own a land, a home, or possessions within the United States because the Constitution says we have the right to do so. So I just want to start off this lesson with a discussion of Native American relations in the 1950s when the Red Power movement took place. So we're going to start with the US government revoking recognition of over 100 tribes under the House Concurrent Resolution 108. This was similar to the Dawes Severalty Act, and it stripped the ability of tribes to govern themselves and their ability to be seen as American citizens, which essentially split up tribes, removed land from them, and took away their rights as American citizens, which meant they couldn't have a say in government to undo the damage done. The Relocation Act of 1965 resulted in 750,000 Native Americans relocating to cities, and it resulted in these migrants being separated from their communities and isolated, and it forced them into segregated areas where they were treated as second-class citizens. The National Congress of American Indians, or NCAI, was established in 1944, and it was the first organization made up of multiple tribes run entirely by Native Americans. And it fought against voting discrimination, the breakdown of relations with the US government, US interference in tribal matters. It fought to regain land, all that sort of stuff. And throughout this whole time, children were still being taken away from Native American families and placed in residential boarding schools where they were stripped of their language, culture, names, and sometimes their lives. So, from this history, as well as the hundreds of years of history before this, The Red Power movement grew. So it was a social movement led by Native American youth to fight for Native American self determination. And it fought for the right to create Native American governments and control their own land and resources, and it used civil disobedience to fight for change. And it really grew from the Black Power movement and took inspiration from that. And it used mass militant and unified action. So, as you can see in the picture on the right, this is a protest in front of the Capitol. So there were four major organizations involved in the Red Power movement. The biggest one was the American Indian Movement, or AIM. It was founded in 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it represented urban Native communities. And it was led by youth, and its leaders were young and militant and determined to make a change and fight for what they knew to be right. Next, we have the National Indian Youth Council, or the NIYC, and it was founded in 1961 by Native college students, and it was one of the first militant organizations, the first Native American militant organizations on the scene, and it was a strong opponent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which was a department of the United States government that focused on Native American relations, and historically, it has been corrupt. It has worked against Native Americans. It has violated treaties. So, the third major group was the Women of All Red Nations, or WARN, and it was founded in 1974. It's a branch of AIM that focused on women-specific issues. So, for example, the MMIW crisis. And finally, the fourth organization was the International Indian Treaty Council, or IITC, and it was founded in 1974 in Standing Rock, South Dakota. And it's a voice for Indigenous people and Native Americans internationally. So that includes Indigenous peoples in Canada, Aboriginal people in Australia and New Zealand, and Tanzania. So it focused on the pursuit of sovereignty and self-determination for all of these peoples. And it also includes Siberian people in Russia, just people all over the world who've been hurt by colonialism and had their land taken away because Europeans thought that they deserved their land instead. So on the left, you can see a very recent button from AIM, and it says Remember Wounded Knee, and it has the 3 dates of Wounded Knee. So the 1890 battle initially, the 1973 protest, and the 1990 protest. And I'll be discussing the protests in the slideshow.